Master Tax Advisor and IRS-enrolled agent Roger Pearson passionately educates you on structuring your business to keep more money in your pocket as you navigate the tax landscape to avoid losing money needlessly to the government.
Welcome to Biz Help For You, the show that saves you the expensive learning curve by providing advice from industry experts in every facet of the entrepreneurial journey. Too many small businesses collapse. According to the U.S. Census Bureau, 20% fail within their first year, and less than 35% make it to their 10th anniversary. The goal of this podcast is to change that statistic. So if you're interested in learning more to be a successful entrepreneur, tune in today.
Let me tell you a little bit about my guest today. Over the last 2 decades, working as a master tax advisor, IRS-enrolled agent, Roger has watched hundreds of small business owners lose thousands of dollars needlessly. So he's made it his mission to provide entrepreneurs with the knowledge to build a solid foundation under their business to keep more money in their pockets and give less to the government. So Roger, welcome to the show.
Oh, thank you. Thank you for inviting me.
Before I get into questions on the topic, I'd love for you just to share a little bit more about yourself and how you began working with the business owners in the local community or, throughout the United States.
Well, I've always been an entrepreneur at heart and a teacher at heart, except I found out when I majored in teaching and education in college that I couldn't deal with the public school systems. There was just too much nonsense going on, and they don't let you teach. They cut all this stuff. So I went out into the world to the University of Life, and I've always been an entrepreneur at heart. And I've always tried this business or that business. I found a lot of businesses I don't like. And by a series of misfortunes, about 2001, I found myself downsized out of the corporate world for 3 times in 10 years. And I just didn't know what I wanted to do at that point. I didn't feel like going back into the corporate world. So my sister-in-law says, well, why don't you go take this tax class, give you some part-time work in the meantime, And I found that I became fascinated with it. And now I've been doing it for over 2 decades. And with my business background, I found that I really enjoyed working with small business people because I'd have so many come in and it's just the messes I had to straighten out were terrific in some spaces. And I came to realize that, they don't teach small business in schools. They really don't. It's even hard to find vocational training in the schools anymore, unless you go to a specific vocational college. And so I began rumbling around this idea of putting together something to help small businesses avoid all the mistakes and all the lost money that I've been seeing over the years. And that's what started my mission.
Nice. That's so true. I mean, people start a business because they have a passion, or maybe they went to school to become a doctor or an attorney or something, but they don't teach you a lot of these things, especially around finance. Or maybe you had like a few lessons maybe on understanding how to use money, but it's so true that so many don't know how to operate a business and what they could be doing, to save on taxes, save for their future, have profit, I think so. It's really important to have that discussion. So thank you for being here today. Yeah, the first question I want to ask you then, let's get into the structures of the businesses. And people may not understand the different entity types and what might be more beneficial than another. So I'd love for you maybe just to talk about the different structures and what considerations maybe they need to take under, the thought process to figure out what might be best for them.
Well, at the federal level, there's 3 basic formats. There's the sole proprietorship, there's the corporation, and there's the partnership. And at the state level, there's a lot more. At the state levels, you have LLCs, you have 5 different types of partnerships that you can form, depending on what state you're in. And what most people don't realize is that taxes are actually one of the largest expenses that you have. I found so many people starting out, they had no notion of what format is what. And they went into shock when I told them, well, 25 to 35% of your net profit is going to go to the state and federal government. right off the top.
Mhm.
You've actually made no money this year by the time you get paying that. And that is a shock to a first-time entrepreneur. And that's what the training needs to be. That's what we need to provide to people so that they know these things going in. It's just like the other day, I had a young lady come in and sit down before me, and she says, well, I was thinking for some extra money, I'd go get one of these delivery jobs like Uber or one of those things. And so I explained to her what the what the consequences of that is, and that unless she was planning on doing it 30 to 40 hours a week, she would probably lose money in the process by the time you pay all your expenses. And she said, well, that didn't sound like a very good idea. But hundreds of people every year do that, and they find that out. And that's why most people, by the time they do their first tax return, say, I'm not doing this business anymore if I'm not making any money.
Mhm.
And that's a shame. That's what I hate seeing.
Mhm. Well, and it's so true because you think like, oh, I'm going to start a business and I'm going to have, this much income. And they don't realize too that not only do you have to pay that large percentage out, but you don't get to deduct that as an expense either. It's just money
No,
that you
no.
spent, but you don't get to write it off.
Exactly. And then you have the other end of the spectrum where Uncle Joe says, you ought to be an S corporation. Well, that's good and fine. You can shelter part of your profits from payroll taxes, which is 15.3% of your profits. But on the other hand, they don't take into consideration the cost of becoming an S corporation. You have to pay the state anywhere from $150 to California charges $800 a year to be a corporation, which is it's amazing to me. But that you have to take into consideration. You have to take into consideration that most small business people are going to have somebody do their taxes, and that's going to run anywhere $500 to $600 a year. You have to payroll yourself, according to the IRS. Otherwise they consider it invasion of you're not paying your fair share of payroll taxes.
Mhm.
And those. So you have to get your business to the point where you know when to switch from the sole proprietorship over to another type of corporation, S corporation, for instance, to balance the cost of that versus the savings you're going to save on taxes. Then you get into people that, well, my buddy came over and said, I got a great opportunity for you. Let's go in together, do a partnership, and we'll just make a fortune on this company.
Mhm.
Well, there's a lot of things to consider on that also. Like I said, there's 5 different types of partnerships there. You need to do a partnership agreement. I found so many people that they don't do the partnership agreement, and then they have a fight, and the breakups are just as bad as a divorce. So
Right.
I say a partnership agreement is kind of like a prenuptial. It states what happens if you decide to leave the partnership or dissolve the partnership. So everybody's got everything straight, and you're not going to have all those bad feelings, especially if it's a husband and wife partnership. Those are the worst.
Mhm.
So you have to consider that also. And you never know when an opportunity is going to come along like that. So if you sit down and you've studied all the different legal formats, then no matter what opportunity comes along your way or what niche in the marketplace you think you can fill, you're going to know exactly how to structure your business.
Mhm. Exactly. Well, and I agree with you, especially in terms of the partnership. I've had a few clients in the past that had come to me, to have some bookkeeping help. And then over time, they don't remember things the same way, right? And so then there's some disagreements,
Exactly.
and, then they're asking me, different things. And I was like, well, what does your operating agreement say? And they're like, what do you mean? Right? Well, we just talked about it. We shook hands. It's like, that's not a good idea. So even if you're the best of friends, get it in writing, right?
Absolutely. Every time.
Mhm.
Every time. Even if it's a
Exactly.
husband and wife partnership, you should put it in writing,
Mhm.
because
Exactly,
people
because
forget. You're
we
right.
might forget specifically what we agreed to, or your definition of what something means could be different than the other person too. That was one of the disagreements that someone came to me because one person was putting in the money and one person was putting in the sweat equity. And then the person who was doing the sweat equity was thinking, well, it's not fair that this person isn't doing any work. Well, if your
Exactly.
agreement was that they didn't have to, you know what I mean? So yeah, make sure that you each understand what the terms
Yeah,
are.
and people don't realize in those cash and sweat equity arrangements, a lot of times you can write into a partnership agreement. Well, I get 80% of the profits until such time as we've made enough, to make up what I've put in, and then we
Hmm.
go 50-50 after that. And you could do all kinds of fun things about partnerships, but if you've
Hmm.
not studied them and you don't know the rules, you're not going to know that you can do those things.
Right. Hmm. So do you want to talk in a little bit more detail, maybe on the advantages and disadvantages of each? I know you talked about, so like an S corporation or corporation, you do have to pay, this corporate tax as well, but there are some protections that you may have that you wouldn't otherwise, and so to help them really understand the pros and cons, do you want to go into a little bit more detail on that?
Well, most small single member businesses are nowadays doing the LLC, which stands, of course, limited liability company. And they think that is a corporation. Well, it is not. It's just what it does is it takes your sole proprietorship and it puts a level of liability protection on it, the same way as a corporation has a limited liability on it. Of course, if you actually do the corporation, you're going to have more liability. A C corporation, of course, is complete liability, and they can't come back to you. And an S corporation gives you a lot also, unless if they can determine that you're fraudulent, and then
Mm.
the court can strip that protection away. But so, yeah, those are the
So
main
mainly
things.
the considerations are really, how much do you want to pay out of pocket for certain things? Like you'll have minimum taxes, but you're going to have more protection than like a sole proprietor. They could come after your assets personally.
Exactly. And that's the reason that partnerships also become multi-member
Hmm.
LLCs, to give them that level of, and that's why the LLC was created by all the states. It's the state level thing. And it took over a decade for all 50 states to finally pass some form of an LLC. But it
Hmm.
does give those sole proprietors and those partnerships some liability protection, which is very, very important. So that I always tell people, if they're going to be a sole proprietor, at least go out and get your LLC just to protect yourself. You really
Hmm.
need to do that.
Right. So talk about the mission and vision of the company too, and how does that shape the structure of the business? Like, do they really need to consider that, or is it something they can think about after they've created their entity or decided to be a sole proprietor? Like, how does that work into it?
Well, you can determine that afterwards. But if you're really serious about being a good business person, you should educate yourself. Education is everything.
Hmm.
And if you've got to find it someplace or another. Now, all this stuff is out on the internet, and you can ask advice from this person and that person, and you don't really know if it's true until you've actually studied it yourself. But the
Hmm.
thing about it is, and what I try to help people with is that there's actually three different things that make a structurally sound business. And the first, of course, is the legal format that you choose to run your business under, and when you should change that legal format, for monetary reasons. The second one is how you organize all of your paperwork, because as an accountant would tell you, they can only do as good a job for you as what you provide them. And the more you know about organization and depreciation schedules and mileage logs and all of that you need to keep as a small business person, the better job the person that you hire can do for you. And of course, the third part is taxes. Now, taxes play into the legal format, and they play into the organization of your paperwork. They all work
Hmm.
together, and you really need to learn all three of them to really build a solid foundation. I like to say to build a solid foundation on rock instead of sand.
Hmm.
Basically, what you're doing there, and it's going to pay you back many times over the years.
Hmm. Well, and I agree in terms of the organization for sure. As a company that helps with bookkeeping and, the payroll and things for the small business entrepreneur, it's much easier for us to, number one, have the paperwork on a consistent basis, but something that we can easily understand, not things just shoved into a box, that kind of what people have in their mind, that people show up with their little box of paperwork or something, and it's just all tossed together. It's so much more difficult for us to be able to go through everything and put it all together to give you good financial reports to give to the CPA to file the taxes than if we have an organized system. So we try to talk with people about having that system and following it consistently. And I know it's hard as entrepreneurs. There's like so much to do and you keep thinking, I'll get to it later, right? But having that organization is really important to have a good set of books.
It is, because one of the things as an entrepreneur is you really need to know what your net profit is at any time and space during the year. Because if you wait to the end of the year to find out if you made any money or not, that's not a good thing. You need to know at any one time. So a good business is able to take a 90-degree right turn. If they find out they're not making any money, then they know in the middle of the year they better change tactics or something. Because it's not going to get any better the rest of the year. And unless you have that structure and that, you can't make those good decisions, and by the time you do realize what's happening, you sometimes put yourself out of business.
Well, and one of the things I thought of right as you were talking as well, too, is about taxes and having to make those estimated tax payments. So if you're waiting to the end of the year to do your bookkeeping too, and you don't know that your income has just gone way above what you thought, right? If you didn't make those changes for the estimated tax payments, you can end up in a little bit of hot water too. So do you want to talk about, that aspect of the business as well and why it's important to make those payments?
Oh, absolutely. Because the tax system we have in this country is a pay-as-you-go system, and you're expected to, there's 4 times of estimated taxes. The first one is for the first 3 months, and then the next 2 months, and then the next 3 months, and the last 4 months. So you've got, you're meant to send in your share of taxes in April, and then June and September, and then January the following year for the last 4 months. Because if you do not, there's penalties involved in that, because the IRS expects you to prepay at least 90% of what you actually owe in taxes, and that includes the payroll taxes and your regular taxes on top of that, or you're going to have to pay a penalty on the above 90%. It's not a real large penalty, but any penalty to me is a bad penalty, depending on how much money. If you had $100,000 profit and you didn't send anything to cover it, then you're going to have a pretty good sized penalty. So that's the other reason you really need to keep your books well. Otherwise, at the end of the year, you're liable to have a real big bill to pay the IRS, and you're going to yourself, well, how am I going to pay that? I didn't save any money back for it, or I didn't send any money in to cover it, and especially a first-time entrepreneur, a sole proprietor, who doesn't understand that. They're used to the W-2 where somebody does it for them. And they have to realize that they're now the employer, and it's their responsibility to do it for themselves. So that's the other big thing that I run into all the time.
I agree. And even those who are operating an S corporation who are on payroll, they might be thinking, well, my payroll taxes are enough, they're being taken out, but they may not be considering the fact that, well, the business is still going to have more tax due than what you're having for payroll. And so if you don't make those estimates, you still could end up with penalties.
Oh, that's absolutely true. And because when you're an S corporation, of course, you W-2 yourself, and the W-2 amount, the IRS likes to see between 40 and 60% of your share of the profits as in payroll. Otherwise, they consider evasion of payroll taxes. And the rest of it comes down on a K-1, which is considered investment expense, just like if you invested in IBM or Microsoft and you got dividends, you're going to have investment expense. That investment expense is not subject to the 15.3 payroll, but it is subject to all the regular taxes, whether you're 10, 12, or 22% tax bracket. You need to be putting money away for that also, that you're going to have to pay with your taxes at the end of the year.
Right. Well, talking about the structures too, whether it's a sole proprietorship or a partnership or an S corporation or things like that, obviously there's roles and responsibilities for each type of entity. So do you want to talk about what those roles are and the importance of having those, even if you're a sole proprietor, defining what those roles really are, and then how that could affect the structure of the entity as well?
Well, for instance, on partnerships, you'll find a lot of the big lawyer firms and the big medical firms. They're all partnerships.
Hmm.
Multi-member LLC partnerships. Most of them are, and because the partnership actually gives you the most flexibility of anything, you can write anything into a partnership agreement. Your share of the profits, your share of this, your share of that, guaranteed payments, all kinds of
Hmm.
things that you can go in there. And so it gives you a lot of flexibility. If you go into the corporate world, then it's very, 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 very structured. You can only have so many shareholders, and like S corp, you can only have one type of stock. And you can't have any foreign members to it, like you could in a partnership, for instance. And so there's a lot of structure there. And for a lot of people, that's good. And for a lot of people, they have to actually go. I know that in the state of Florida here, if you're in certain of the trades, you have to be a corporation. They won't
Hmm.
let you run it under a sole proprietorship because of liability reasons and so forth. So that's the other thing that has to be considered when you're doing legal formats, the type of your business you're in can also dictate what type of legal format that you need to be in.
Hmm. Yeah, that's so true. I had a client that came to me once. He had formed an LLC and then found out he wasn't allowed to because of the entity, or I'm sorry, the industry that he was in, and he had to form a corporation, not an LLC. And so I think that's wise advice too. Look into it before you form an entity, because you don't want to pay to form one type and find out you can't.
Exactly. Exactly. That's true. Yeah. And it all
Hmm.
comes down to education. It really, really does.
Right. So, if someone is, let's say they're a sole proprietor right now and their business just, really starts growing, or, there's things that they are implementing in their business now, that there are some changes that are happening, like at what point do you suggest they consider a different entity type? Because a lot of people do start a business thinking, I'll just be a sole proprietor, I'm small, I don't have a lot of liability. When should they consider making a change?
It's really, if you've got a net profit of in excess of $50,000, then you need to be looking at it because, it's just like this season I had a home chef and she just really became successful faster than she ever
Mm.
thought. And she made over $100,000 her first year, which is
Wow, that's
really
great.
phenomenal, right?
Hmm.
And when I initially did the run through on her taxes, she would have owed $6,500 because she didn't make any estimated tax payments. She had never done this before. And so I helped her restructure. She came to me in time that I could do this, and I helped her restructure. And instead of paying 65, we got her about a $2,500 refund just from the differences in payroll, that 15% payroll tax.
Hmm.
And it's amazing. So if you have a good tax preparer, they're going to sit down with you and they're going to ask these questions and they're going to
Hmm.
help analyze what your business is. And that's one of the other things that really I talk to people about is that you really, really need to interview your tax preparer. You need to interview your accountant or CPA to see if they're just a numbers person next, or whether
Hmm.
they're willing to sit down with you and learn your business. For me to do the
Hmm.
best job I can as a tax preparer, I actually have to learn their business and how it operates and how they operate to be able to advise them properly and to use the IRS tax laws to their advantage.
Hmm.
And so you can't, if you were a plumber, you wouldn't just hire somebody unless you knew they were a good plumber. And the
Hmm.
same thing goes with your tax preparer, accountant, or CPA. If you study all of these things, the legal formats, the organization, and the tax structures, you're going to be able to sit down, you're going to be able to interview that person to see if they're going to do the best job for you. And if
Hmm.
they're not willing to sit down and interview and allow you to interview them, then you should get up and walk away and go
Hmm.
find somebody that does. And it's unfortunate that I see so many people, they just told me to drop it off and I'll call them when they're done. And
Hmm.
I correct a lot of mistakes because of that. And then if I've watched people lose a lot of money because of that attitude. And so
Right.
that's a very, very important thing, as much as learning all the other structures is
Hmm.
you're eventually going to need to put somebody on your team that takes care of this for you because you're busy. You're an entrepreneur. You're
Right.
out there working. You're trying to make money and you don't have time for this. And do not assume that the person you're talking to knows what they're talking about because
Hmm.
just like
Right.
any other industry, there's good ones and there's bad ones. And if you educate yourself and you know how things are supposed to be structured, and you sit down with them, have them explain the depreciation rules for you. That's a good one, because I've saved a lot of people money by using the depreciation rules in the IRS code.
Well, and I agree. And I tell clients too, I recommend meeting with your CPA at least once a year before the year is done, but even twice a year is even better. But usually by October, if you're going to do only once, by like October or something is a good time. If you're going to do twice, maybe in the spring and in the fall, but have them look at where your books are right now. Like, are there changes you need to make? Like you're talking about, maybe they find out at this point it's better, to put you on payroll, and, you could be an entity and then run things through payroll taxes, but give the CPA the opportunity to review, and you have time to make changes before the end of the year. Because too many people wait till the year's done and they're finally going to go get their tax prep, and now it's too late, right, to make those changes. So I also think it's really important, no matter what entity type you are, have those meetings with your CPA and look at the implications of what's happening for your taxes.
That's right. If you do it before the end of the year, you have chances to make changes that could save you a lot of money. Absolutely.
Yep. And even if you have to pay, like some CPAs, maybe just in your total tax package, that's included. But some of them, maybe you just have, here's the fee, to do your tax returns. And then if you're going to have a consultation, here's a different fee. But that fee is well worth it. And you get to write it off anyway, right? But I think what I have noticed, and I don't do the tax returns, we do everything up to that point. We do the bookkeeping so we can send it off to the CPA for them to do the taxes. But a lot of times the entrepreneur is very cautious, especially if they're newer in business and they have to watch their expenses. And so they're trying to limit what they're spending, but not realizing like you can actually get a bigger return by having that meeting, maybe paying a few $100s, but they can maybe save you thousands, right? So look at the return on what you're spending as well, and not just look at it as an expense and money out of your pocket.
Absolutely. Absolutely. The other thing important is, of course, is to, especially when you're going to a CPA, I find this, and I don't mean to offend any CPAs, but they're not required to take tax courses as part of their continuing education every year. That's an elective. They have to take a couple when they become a CPA, but they never have to take another one after that. So if you're interviewing an accountant or a CPA that's also going to do your taxes, then one of the things that you should ask them, how many of your continuing education classes each year are in the subject of taxes? Because they change constantly. You have to keep up with them.
Every year it seems something changes, right?
Absolutely, yeah. Either that or find a good enrolled agent. An enrolled agent, a lot of people they hear the enrolled agent and they go, well, what is that? An enrolled agent is the highest classification, the highest certification that you can get in the tax world. It's like the PhD of the tax world, because by default, CPAs, lawyers, and some actuaries can represent people before the IRS. It's when I do it, I tell my clients I do not want them there. They'll say something that they shouldn't say. But enrolled agents are the only certification that you get by actually studying tax law. You have to take 3-hour IRS tests, which are all written in IREs, and they're a pain. But you really have to, and you have to take about 25 hours a year in continuing education just to keep up on everything. So if you want somebody that has the most amount of tax knowledge, an enrolled agent is very, very good. And if you're going to hire a CPA to do your accounting and your taxes, make sure that you hire one that's also studying taxes, because they have to keep up on the latest or they're going to miss something for you.
Right. Exactly. Well, I know this has been an enlightening conversation, and I know there's so much more we could talk about on this topic, but I know we're running short on time. So I would love to ask if you have an offer that you would like to share with our listeners, and also how can they connect with you if they want more information?
Well, my main corporate website is Seagull Technologies. Seagull is spelled like the bird. There's a whole story behind that. I actually have Seagull, the autobiography, on my website, which is kind of cute. But I invite everybody, if they want to know more about building a foundation, I do have a free report out there that I invite you to just download. It's at seagulltechnologies.com/free. And it goes into the basics of what I've talked about this afternoon. and gives you a better highlight of where you want to go from there. I also offer consulting. I offer paid courses in all of this, extensive college level courses in building a solid foundation also. And you find all that on my website as well.
Perfect. Well, thank you, Roger, for being a guest on my show and talking on this topic. I know it's very informative for those who, especially if they're not sure what entity to be, they're thinking of starting a business. I think this was extremely helpful. So I appreciate your taking the time to chat with me today.
I really enjoyed it. Thank you for having me.
Thank you, listeners, for tuning in today. I hope you found this topic interesting and enjoyed the informative discussion. Would you please share my show with those you know and leave a review on your favorite podcast platform? I'd really appreciate your support. If you have any additional questions or comments, be sure to reach out to my guest at any of the links that they shared, or you could send me a message at media@abandp.com. I hope you can join me for my next interview. And remember, you can connect with me on Twitter, Facebook, and LinkedIn. And my website is abandp.com. This episode is sponsored by Affordable Bookkeeping and Payroll Services. If you are overwhelmed trying to handle the financial aspects of your business, ABP is here to help. Contact us today to discuss your needs at 310-534-5577 or contact@abandp.com. My team and I are eager to assist you. Until next time, have a great day.
Thank you for listening to Biz Help For You. Please join your host, Candy Messer, again next time. Have a terrific day.